you said it earlier, we love our own opinions, but we don't love the opinions of others. And somehow that's got to change.
Yeah.
And frankly, I'm at a loss. I mean, other than what you're talking about, education.
I think there's education. I think there's another side of the coin, and that is, Thomas Hobbes, who wrote Leviathan and other political philosophy works, he really focused in on the power of what do you honor as a society in terms of driving people towards the type of behavior that you'd like to see. He was concerned with these aristocratic youth. How do you get them to value the things that are good for the body politic, right? How do you drive a young, ambitious person towards honor, courage, sacrifice for others? And he said, you do that through how you place your honors in society. And so if you think about how we as adults, or we as politicians, or we as parents, what are we honoring and raising up as the virtuous way of living in society? When I see a kid, pop off in an emotional way around the subject, in a lot of ways, they're getting cheerleaded by a lot of people in society. Way to go, you took a stand, way to go. So we really value this sense of get really emotional, get out there, and that's what we honor. And so as a result, a young person looking at that thinks, well, that's how you make a difference.
Yeah.
And so it probably even starts with parenthood. How are you raising your kids around these sorts of shared values and what it means to be a citizen and what it means to be stable in a society? It's got an education tie, but it's also got to be modeled by our politicians, which frankly is not today across both sides of the aisle in terms of what are they valuing and what are we looking at? And so I worry a lot. I used to in the earlier days, I guess, with my kids. I've got a 12-year-old all the way down to a 6-year-old. I've had varying times of being able to be proud about what they're looking at on a news story and watching TV.
Yeah.
It's difficult today. How do I talk to them about the state of politics?
Yeah, no doubt about it.
Unfortunate.
I had lunch with a friend of mine about 2-3 weeks ago, and we were just having a meal talking about current events. There was a lot of protesting going on here in Denton at the time, and he was just sharing with me just, kind of his frustrations with it from his perspective. And so I asked him, and he's a dear friend of mine, and I asked him, I said, hey, do me a favor, make the argument for me. What is their argument? I understand your frustrations, but give me their argument. And he went, well, and he went for about maybe 15 seconds, and then he stopped, and then he went back to his frustration with it. And I said, do you think there's a problem that the best you could do is 15 seconds of making the argument of the other side, even if you disagree with it, that's as far as you were able to go with the argument? And he said, well, what do you think the argument would be? And so I began to make the argument. And listen, I've got a lot to learn, but I've thought a lot about it, and I made the argument, and I took several minutes to explain to him, this is the argument. And he goes, well, that actually makes a lot of sense. I said, well, so how would you work through that? How would you navigate? That's what we're facing today.
Yeah.
And he goes, that's a really good question. And it was amazing how in just a few minutes of challenging even your own friends, you don't have to go and get contentious with people you disagree with. You can go to the people that you know, your children, your family, your friends, and you can be the gadfly to them.
Yeah.
Isn't that true?
Yeah, that's right.
And say, hey, tell me why you think that, and what's the position of the other person, and begin creating slowly this desire to appreciate the perspectives of other both sides.
Yeah, that's a really beautiful example and something that is clearly lacking. If you think about, we both studied Thomas Aquinas at a PhD level in philosophy. How he approached the great questions was to pose the question and then spend pages talking about the objections to what's ultimately his opinion. In other words, he realized, Aquinas, if I'm going to be able to show where Aristotle was wrong in these things, I'm going to be the best Aristotelian scholar of my day. That's the only way I can have any standing to be able to go beyond him.
Yeah.
And so, it's necessary. I mean, if you think about some of the biggest political problems facing our society, they're problems. And in any other situation, you would think we've got the most genius folks in our country that could come together and tackle this thing. If we could set aside our ideological sides and come together through shared understanding, there's got to be another approach to how we're tackling these things.
I think that when you can make the case for the other, I think it allows you to appreciate at least some aspect of where they're coming from. That's got to be a part of the answer.
Yep.
Doesn't it?
Yeah.
And we're not teaching that. We're not teaching people, make the case, tell me, not why do you believe what you believe, but why do they believe what they believe? And really force people to have to get into the mindset of that. I remember when I would read Thomas, and he would start off with making, it has been said or whatever, right? And what does he say? And in response, I reply that.
Right.
I remember I would read sometimes what he would write, and I'd say, yeah, how's he going to overcome that?
Right.
And then he oftentimes would.
Yep.
But he knew the argument so well that you could tell he deeply appreciated these other thinkers.
Yep.
And that is really lacking in our educational system today.
Yes.
Isn't it?
And at the heart, it's just empathy. Empathy towards an argument,
Yeah.
and empathy towards another human being who has that argument.